I found my neighbor Susan digging through my recycling bin at 6 in the morning, and that was just the beginning of the worst 3 months of my life. My name is Seth Quincy, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, for about 2 years when everything started going sideways. The place was nice enough, decent houses with those desert landscaping requirements, and a community pool that nobody really used. I ran a small contracting business specializing in outdoor kitchens and patio installations, which meant I had a lot of supplies coming and going from my property. That included propane tanks, lots of them, since most of my clients wanted built-in grills. The woman in my recycling bin that Tuesday morning was Susan Patterson, the president of our HOA board. She was probably in her late 40s, with that specific haircut that seems to be a regulation issue for women who enjoy telling other people what to do. You know the one, short in the back, longer and angular in the front, usually blonde with highlights. She wore yoga pants despite clearly never doing yoga, and her voice had this perpetually annoyed quality, like everyone around her was personally inconveniencing her just by existing. "Excuse me," I called out from my front door, still holding my coffee mug. "Can I help you with something?" Susan jumped, dropping several pieces of paper back into the bin. She straightened up and plastered on this completely fake smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, Seth, good morning. I was just doing a neighborhood audit of recycling compliance. We have had reports of people not properly sorting their materials. At 6 in the morning, I walked down my driveway in my bare feet, the concrete already warming up despite the early hour. And you need to go through my stuff specifically. Well, as HOA president, it is my responsibility to ensure all residents are following the guidelines." She pulled out a piece of paper that I recognized immediately. It was a receipt from Southwest Propane Supply, dated from last week when I had purchased 3 large tanks for a client's outdoor kitchen installation in Paradise Valley. "That is a receipt," I said flatly. "Since when do we audit people's receipts?" "I noticed you have been receiving an unusual amount of propane deliveries," Susan said, her voice taking on that accusatory tone that I had heard her use at HOA meetings. "The association has concerns about potential fire hazards and commercial activity being conducted from a residential property." I felt my jaw tighten. We had been through this before. I have a home office. I'm allowed to run my business from here as long as I am not having clients come to the property or storing excessive materials. You know this. We discussed it with the board when I moved in. "Yes, well, things change. The board is considering new restrictions." She folded the receipt and, to my absolute shock, put it in her pocket. "I will need to keep this for our records." "That is my property," I said, my voice rising. "You cannot just take things from my recycling. Anything placed in recycling bins on collection day is considered abandoned property," Susan said with this smug expression that made me want to scream. "I suggest you review the HOA Guidelines, Section 12, Paragraph 4. She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in my driveway wondering what the hell had just happened. I went back inside and immediately pulled up the HOA guidelines on my computer. Section 12, Paragraph 4 had nothing to do with recycling or abandoned property. It was about holiday decoration restrictions. That should have been my first clue that Susan was making things up as she went along. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed Susan started showing up around my property more frequently. She would drive by slowly in her white Mercedes SUV, sometimes stopping to take pictures of my house with her phone. Once, I caught her measuring the height of my property fence with a tape measure. When I confronted her about it, she claimed she was just ensuring it met the HOA's height restrictions of 6 feet. My fence was 5 feet, 8 inches, the same height it had been when I bought the house, which had passed inspection back then. Things escalated when I received a formal letter from the HOA demanding I provide documentation for all propane purchases for the past year, copies of my business license, and proof of insurance for commercial activity. The letter was signed by Susan and dated for a hearing scheduled 2 weeks out. The fine for non-compliance started at $500 and increased by $100 per day. I called my accountant, Marcus Chen, who had been handling my business finances since I started the company. Marcus was one of those detail-oriented guys who noticed everything, which made him great at his job but sometimes exhausting to be around. "They want what?" Marcus asked when I read him the letter. "All my propane receipts and business documentation," I said, pacing around my kitchen. "The thing is, Marcus, that receipt Susan took from my recycling had personal information on it. My account number, my business tax ID." "Why would she need that?" Marcus asked, and I could hear him typing in the background. "HOAs can request proof of insurance and business licenses, but they do not need your tax ID or account numbers. That is not relevant to any HOA regulation I know of." "Right, that is what I thought." I pulled open my filing cabinet where I kept physical copies of important receipts. "I have most of my documentation here, but I am missing a few receipts from the past couple months. I think they might have been in my recycling before I realized Susan was going through it. Send me a list of the dates you are missing, and I will pull copies from our digital records," Marcus said. "But Seth, I need to tell you, this sounds weird. Like really weird. Why would an HOA president be personally going through your trash to collect receipts with your financial information on them?" I had not thought about it in those terms, but hearing Marcus say it out loud made my stomach turn. "I don't know, man. I just thought she was being her usual controlling self." "I am going to do some checking on my end," Marcus said. "In the meantime, get me that list, and do not give the HOA any documents with sensitive financial information on them. If they need proof of business activity, we can provide sanitized versions." I spent the rest of that afternoon compiling the list of missing receipts. There were 5 in total, all from Southwest Propane Supply, dating back about 3 months. The amounts ranged from $300 to $800, which was normal for my business. What bothered me was that all of them had my full business account number printed at the bottom. The HOA hearing was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community center, which was really just a fancy name for a room in the back of the neighborhood clubhouse. I showed up with a folder full of documentation, sanitized copies that Marcus had prepared with sensitive information redacted. Susan sat at a table in the front with 2 other board members, Richard something and Patricia something else. I had seen them around but never really talked to them. The room had about a dozen other residents scattered in folding chairs, probably there for their own violations or just to watch the show. "Mr. Quincy," Susan said, using this formal tone like we were in actual court, "thank you for attending. We are here to discuss concerns about commercial activity being conducted from your residence in violation of HOA covenants." I took a seat in the front row. "I am not in violation. I have a home office which is permitted. I do not have clients coming to the property, and I do not store excessive materials. We have documented evidence of multiple propane deliveries," Susan said, pulling out a folder that was way thicker than it should have been. "In the past 6 months alone, you have received," she made a show of reading from a paper, "17 propane deliveries totaling over $6,000. "How do you know the dollar amounts?" I asked, my blood running cold. "We have our sources," Susan said with that smug expression again. "Your sources," I stood up. The only way you would know the specific dollar amounts is if you have my receipts, the ones you stole from my recycling bin. The room got very quiet. Richard and Patricia exchanged glances. I did not steal anything, Susan said, her voice getting sharp. As I explained, items in recycling bins are abandoned property. That is not how that works, I said. And even if it was, you have no legal right to my financial records. Those receipts have my business tax ID and account numbers on them. Mr. Quincy, if you are going to be hostile, we will have to continue this hearing without your input, Susan said. I am hostile because you are going through my trash and stealing my personal financial information, I shot back. What are you even doing with those receipts? Susan's face flushed red. I am documenting HOA violations. Now, unless you can provide proof that your business activity is compliant with neighborhood covenants, we are prepared to issue a fine of $500, increasing by $100 per day until compliance is achieved. I pulled out my folder and walked up to the table, dropping it in front of her. Here is my business license. Here is my insurance. Here is a letter from my attorney stating that a home office is permitted under Arizona law and your covenants. What I am not providing is my financial records because you have no legal right to them and no legitimate reason to have them. Susan barely glanced at the documents. These will need to be reviewed by the board. In the meantime, the fine stands. This is harassment, I said. This is enforcement, Susan countered. If you do not like the rules, you are free to sell your home and move elsewhere. I left the hearing furious and immediately called Marcus. It was late, almost 9 at night, but he picked up on the second ring. They are fining me $500, I said, not bothering with a greeting. And Susan definitely has my receipts. She quoted exact dollar amounts. Seth, I need you to stay calm and listen to me, Marcus said, his voice serious in a way I had not heard before. Something came across my desk today that you need to know about. I got a fraud alert from one of your business credit monitoring services. My heart stopped. What kind of fraud alert? Someone tried to open a business credit account using your tax ID and business information, Marcus said. It was flagged because the address did not match what is on file. They used your name, your business tax ID, and listed Southwest Propane Supply as a credit reference with your account number. I sat down hard on my couch. Susan. I do not want to jump to conclusions, but the timing is suspicious as hell, Marcus said. The application was submitted 4 days ago, right after she would have had access to those receipts with your information on them. What do I do? I asked, my mind racing. First, we file a police report for identity theft, Marcus said. Second, we freeze your business credit immediately. Third, we contact Southwest Propane and put alerts on your account. And fourth, you do not pay that HOA fine. If Susan is using her position to steal financial information for identity theft, this is way beyond an HOA dispute. I did not sleep that night. I kept thinking about Susan going through my recycling, taking those receipts, and then having the audacity to fine me while she was literally trying to steal my identity. It felt surreal, like something that happened to other people, not to me. The next morning, I drove to the Scottsdale Police Department and filed a report. The officer who took my statement was a younger guy named Officer Ramirez who looked skeptical at first. So let me get this straight, Officer Ramirez said, typing on his computer. Your HOA president took receipts from your recycling bin, and now someone tried to open a credit account with your information. I know how it sounds, I said. But she admitted to taking the receipts. There were multiple witnesses at the HOA hearing. And the credit application was submitted right after she would have had access to my tax ID and account numbers. Officer Ramirez leaned back in his chair. Has she done anything else suspicious? I told him about Susan driving by my house constantly, taking pictures, measuring my fence, and the harassment about my business. As I talked, his expression changed from skeptical to interested. And you have documentation of all this? He asked. I have the HOA letter demanding my financial information, the sanitized documents I provided, and my accountant can provide records of the credit application and the fraud alert, I said. Plus there were witnesses at the hearing who heard her admit she has my receipts and quoted my exact purchase amounts. Okay, Officer Ramirez said, starting to type more seriously. I am going to take your statement and file this as suspected identity theft. We will need to investigate, which means we might need to interview your HOA president and other board members. You should know that these cases can take time. What do I do in the meantime? I asked. Follow your accountant's advice about freezing your credit and monitoring your accounts, he said. Document everything this woman does. If she shows up on your property, if she contacts you, if she sends more letters, everything, and do not confront her directly. If this is identity theft, you do not want to do anything that could be construed as harassment on your end. I left the police station feeling slightly better but also more anxious. This was not just an annoying HOA dispute anymore. This was potentially criminal. Marcus worked fast. By that afternoon, he had frozen my business credit with all 3 major bureaus, contacted Southwest Propane to put alerts on my account, and started compiling a comprehensive report of the attempted fraud. He also reached out to the company that had received the fraudulent credit application, a commercial equipment supplier in Phoenix. Here is what we know, Marcus said when he called me back. The credit application was submitted online using your business name, tax ID, and the account number from Southwest Propane as a reference. But whoever submitted it used a different email address and a P.O. box in Scottsdale for the mailing address. Can we find out who owns the P.O. box? I asked. The police can, but we cannot, Marcus said. However, I did some digging on the email address. It is a Gmail account, so not directly traceable, but the username is interesting. It is Meadowbrook Hills 2025. Sound familiar? My blood ran cold. That is our neighborhood name. Exactly, Marcus said. Now, that does not prove anything by itself. Anyone could create an email with that name. But combined with everything else, it is another piece of the puzzle. Over the next week, Susan's harassment escalated. I received 3 more letters from the HOA, each one adding additional fines for supposed violations. One claimed my garage door was the wrong color, even though it was the same color as every other garage door in the neighborhood. Another said my landscaping was not in compliance with desert xeriscaping requirements, despite the fact that I had professional landscapers maintain it. The third claimed I was parking a commercial vehicle in my driveway, referring to my personal truck that had a small magnetic sign on the door with my business name. Each letter added another $500 in fines. I was up to $2,000 in less than 2 weeks. I documented everything and forwarded copies to Officer Ramirez and Marcus. I also started noticing that Susan was not just watching my house anymore. She was following me. I would see her white Mercedes behind me when I drove to the hardware store or to client sites. She was always a few cars back, but it was definitely her. One afternoon, I was coming out of Home Depot in Temp when I spotted her parked a few rows away in the parking lot, just sitting in her car watching me load supplies into my truck. I pulled out my phone and took a picture, making sure I got her license plate in the frame. She noticed and immediately started her car and drove off. That evening, Marcus called with more disturbing news. There was another credit application, he said without preamble. This time it was for a business loan with a local credit union, $15,000. They used the same information, same fake email, but this time they listed you as having a second business location in Fountain Hills. I do not have a second location, I said, feeling sick. I know. The credit union flagged it because of the freeze we put on your credit, but Seth, this is getting serious. Whoever is doing this is not giving up. They are trying multiple angles. It has to be Susan, I said. Who else would have my information? Who else would be motivated to do this? The police need to move faster, Marcus said. Have you heard anything from Officer Ramirez? I had not, so I called the police station. Officer Ramirez was not available, but I left a detailed message about the second credit application and Susan following me. He called back the next morning. Mr. Quincy, I have been working on your case, he said. We have had some difficulty getting cooperation from your HOA board. Miss Patterson has refused to be interviewed without her attorney present, which is her right, but it is also suspicious. However, we have been able to confirm some things. Like what? I asked. We checked the P.O. box from the first credit application. It was rented 3 months ago by someone using a fake ID, but the rental agreement had a credit card payment on file. That card belongs to Susan Patterson. I actually felt dizzy. So it is her. It is looking that way, but we need more evidence to make an arrest, Officer Ramirez said. Credit card information alone is not enough. She could claim her card was stolen or used without her permission. We need something more concrete. What about the emails? Can you trace those? I asked. We have subpoenaed Google for the account information, but that takes time. Could be weeks, he said. In the meantime, I need you to keep documenting everything, and I need you to be careful. If Miss Patterson realizes we are investigating her, she might escalate. As if on cue, that afternoon I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. It informed me that due to my continued non-compliance with neighborhood covenants and my failure to pay outstanding fines, the HOA was initiating foreclosure proceedings on my home. They claimed I owed over $3,000 in fines and late fees, and if I did not pay within 30 days, they would place a lien on my property. I called my own attorney, a guy named David Sorensen who specialized in HOA disputes. I had used him once before for a client who was having issues with their HOA, and he was sharp. They cannot foreclose for these kinds of fines, David said after I read him the letter. Arizona law has specific requirements for HOA foreclosures, and petty fines for supposed covenant violations do not meet the threshold. This is intimidation. What do? I asked. We fight back, David said. I am going to file an emergency motion to prevent any lien from being placed on your property, and I am going to demand a full accounting of these supposed violations and fines. If they cannot provide legitimate documentation, which I suspect they cannot, we can go after them for harassment and abuse of authority. There is more, I said, and told him about the identity theft investigation. David was quiet for a long moment. Seth, this is not just an HOA dispute anymore. If the police investigation confirms that Susan Patterson used her position as HOA president to steal your financial information for identity theft, she is looking at serious criminal charges. We are talking fraud, identity theft, possibly stalking. She could do real prison time. Good, I said, surprised by the venom in my own voice. She has been making my life hell. The challenge is that until the police have enough evidence to make an arrest, she is still the HOA president and still has that authority, David said. We need to move carefully. I am going to reach out to the other board members and see if we can get her removed from her position, or at least suspended pending the investigation. David worked fast. Within 2 days, he had filed the emergency motion and had scheduled meetings with Richard and Patricia, the other 2 board members. I did not attend those meetings, but David called me afterward with an update. "Richard and Patricia are spooked," David said. "I informed them about the police investigation into Susan for identity theft, and they both went pale. Apparently, they have been noticing some weird behavior from her lately, but they did not want to say anything." "What kind of weird behavior?" I asked. "Richard said Susan has been obsessive about you specifically. She brings you up at every board meeting, constantly talks about finding violations at your property, and has been pushing to change the HOA covenants to specifically target home-based businesses." Patricia said Susan told her she was conducting background checks on residents to ensure they were suitable for the neighborhood, whatever that means. "Background checks," I said. "She cannot do that." "No, she absolutely cannot," David agreed. "That is a massive invasion of privacy, and likely illegal depending on how she was obtaining information. I told Richard and Patricia that if they want to avoid being implicated in any of Susan's activities, they need to cooperate with the investigation and consider removing her from the board." "Will they do it?" I asked. "They are discussing it," David said. "The challenge is that according to your HOA bylaws, removing a board member requires a vote of the homeowners, which means a special meeting. That takes time to organize." "How much time?" I asked. "At least 2 weeks, maybe more," David said. In the meantime, they agreed to suspend her authority to issue fines or take any action against homeowners without approval from the full board. It is not perfect, but it is something. That weekend, I was working in my garage when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Officer Ramirez and another officer, this one older with a detective's badge. "Mr. Quincy, this is Detective Morrison," Officer Ramirez said. "Can we come in?" I let them in, my heart pounding. They sat on my couch while I took the chair across from them. "We have been moving forward with the investigation into Susan Patterson," Detective Morrison said. "We have got enough evidence now to bring her in for questioning, and we wanted to give you a heads up." "What kind of evidence?" I asked. "Google responded to our subpoena," Detective Morrison said. "The email account used for the fraudulent credit applications was created from Susan Patterson's home IP address. We also pulled security footage from the post office where the P.O. box was rented. The woman in the footage matches Miss Patterson's description and was wearing clothing we have seen her wear in other photos and videos from HOA meetings." "So you are arresting her?" I asked, barely able to believe it. "We are bringing her in for questioning," Detective Morrison said. "If she admits to the identity theft, or if we find additional evidence during our interview, then yes, we will arrest her. But I want to be straight with you, Mr. Quincy. These cases can be complicated. Even with good evidence, sometimes people lawyer up and things drag out." "I understand," I said, though I really wanted her arrested immediately. "We also wanted to warn you that once we bring Miss Patterson in, she is going to know you were the one who reported her," Officer Ramirez added. "She might retaliate in some way, either directly or through the HOA. You need to be vigilant." They left, and I immediately called Marcus and David to update them. Marcus was relieved but cautious. David was more optimistic. "If they have IP address records and security footage, that is pretty solid evidence," David said. "She would have a hard time explaining why she was renting a P.O. box with a fake ID, and then credit applications were submitted from her home computer using that P.O. box address." "When will they question her?" I asked. "They did not say," David asked. "No, just that it would be soon," I said. "Probably within the next few days," David said. They are likely getting their ducks in a row, making sure they have everything they need before they confront her. That Monday, I was at a job site in North Scottsdale installing a custom outdoor kitchen when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something told me to answer it. "Mr. Quincy," a woman's voice said, "this is Patricia Hendricks from your HOA board." "Patricia, hi," I said, stepping away from my work crew. "What can I do for you?" "I need to inform you that Susan Patterson was placed on administrative leave this morning," Patricia said, her voice tight. "She was escorted from her home by police for questioning regarding some serious allegations. The board is still functioning, but Richard and I wanted you to know that any fines or violations Susan issued against you are being reviewed and likely will be voided." "Thank you for letting me know," I said, trying to keep the relief out of my voice. "Mr. Quincy, I want to apologize," Patricia continued. "Richard and I should have noticed something was wrong sooner. Susan became so focused on you, and we just thought she was being overly diligent about HOA enforcement. We did not realize she was stealing your information or harassing you." "I appreciate that," I said. "I just want this to be over." "We all do," Patricia said. "The board is discussing hiring a new management company to handle HOA operations going forward. We clearly need more oversight and professionalism." After we hung up, I called Marcus. "They took Susan in for questioning." "I heard," Marcus said. "Detective Morrison called me about an hour ago. They needed documentation of the fraudulent credit applications and the timeline of when Susan had access to your information. I sent everything over. You think they will arrest her?" I asked. "Based on what the detective told me, yeah, I think so," Marcus said. "But Seth, I need to tell you something else. I did a deeper dive into your accounts this morning and I found something concerning." My stomach dropped. "What?" "There was a small charge on your business credit card from 2 months ago that I had overlooked because it was only $50, Marcus said. "It was from a background check service, one that provides comprehensive financial reports." "I did not authorize that," I said. "I know." "I called the company. Someone using your business information ordered a detailed financial report on you. Full credit history, bank accounts, property records, everything. The report was sent to that same P.O. box Susan rented." "She was doing background checks," I said, remembering what David had told me about Patricia's comment, "but not on other residents, on me." "It looks that way," Marcus said. "This is premeditated, Seth. She was gathering your information systematically before she even took those receipts from your recycling. The receipts were just the final pieces she needed." I felt sick. This was not some impulsive crime of opportunity. Susan had been planning to steal my identity for months. That evening, Detective Morrison called me directly. "Mr. Quincy, I wanted to update you. We interviewed Susan Patterson this afternoon, and based on that interview and the evidence we have collected, we arrested her on charges of identity theft, fraud, and theft of financial information." "She admitted it?" I asked. "Not exactly," Detective Morrison said. "She denied everything at first, but when we showed her the IP records and the security footage from the post office, she changed her story. She claimed she was only trying to verify that you were running a legitimate business and not violating HOA covenants. She said the credit applications must have been someone else who somehow got access to the information she collected." "That is insane," I said. "Yeah, it did not hold up," Detective Morrison agreed. "Especially when we searched her home and found printed copies of your credit report, copies of those propane receipts, and a notebook with detailed notes about your daily routine and schedule." "Mr. Quincy, this woman was seriously obsessed with you." "What happens now?" I asked. She was arraigned this evening and released on bond with conditions that she has no contact with you and stays away from your property, Detective Morrison said. Her trial will be scheduled in the next few months. The county attorney is treating this seriously. Given the amount of documentation and premeditation, she is looking at felony charges. How much time could she get? I asked. Identity theft in Arizona can carry up to 5 years depending on the circumstances, Detective Morrison said. With the additional fraud charges and the abuse of authority as HOA president, she could be looking at significant prison time if convicted. The county attorney might offer a plea deal, but that will be up to them. After the call ended, I sat in my quiet house feeling exhausted and vindicated at the same time. It was over. Susan had been arrested. The nightmare was actually ending, but there was still cleanup to do. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved quickly. The HOA board officially voted to void all the fines Susan had issued against me, and they sent a formal letter of apology. David helped me file a civil lawsuit against both Susan personally and the HOA for damages, including legal fees, the cost of credit monitoring services, and compensation for the harassment and emotional distress. Marcus continued to monitor my accounts, and thankfully no more fraudulent applications appeared. The credit freeze stayed in place as a precaution, but it seemed Susan had been working alone. I also started receiving apologies from neighbors I barely knew. Apparently, Susan had been talking about me throughout the neighborhood, making up stories about how I was running an illegal business and bringing down property values. Several people admitted they had believed her because she was the HOA president and seemed so certain. Now they felt foolish for not questioning her motives. The special HOA meeting to elect a new board president happened on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after Susan's arrest. I attended, mostly because David said it would be good to show my face and make it clear I was not going anywhere. The clubhouse was packed. Way more people than usually showed up for HOA meetings. Patricia ran the meeting, and she did not waste time. As you all know, Susan Patterson has been removed from her position as HOA president due to criminal charges related to identity theft and fraud, Patricia said. The board wants to be transparent about what happened and how we are going to prevent anything like this from happening again. She went on to explain that the board was implementing new oversight procedures, including requiring at least 2 board members to approve any fines or enforcement actions, hiring a professional HOA management company, and creating a formal complaint process for homeowners who felt they were being unfairly targeted. When it came time for nominations for a new president, Richard stepped down from the board entirely. He said he felt responsible for not noticing Susan's behavior and thought the neighborhood would be better served by new leadership. Patricia agreed to stay on but said she did not want to be president. A guy named Tom from 3 streets over was nominated and elected. He was a retired accountant who promised to run the HOA like a business with proper checks and balances. After the meeting, he came over to me. "Seth, I just want to say I am sorry for what you went through," Tom said, shaking my hand. "What Susan did was inexcusable and it never should have gotten that far. If you ever have concerns about anything HOA related, my door is open." "I appreciate that," I said. "I just want to get back to normal life." "Understandable," Tom said. "For what it is worth, nobody has a problem with your business. You are not bothering anyone and your property always looks good. Susan was just looking for reasons to target you." "Do you know why?" I asked. It was something that had been bothering me. "Why me specifically?" Tom hesitated. "This is just speculation, but I heard through the grapevine that Susan's husband left her about 6 months ago, right around the time she started focusing on you." Some people think she might have been dealing with the divorce by trying to control everything else in her life, and you became the outlet for that because you were the most visible business owner in the neighborhood. It was not an excuse, but it was at least an explanation. Susan had been dealing with personal issues and had taken them out on me in the most destructive way possible. The civil lawsuit moved forward slowly. Susan's attorney tried to argue that she had been conducting legitimate HOA business, and that any financial information she collected was necessary for enforcement purposes. David tore that argument apart in court filings, pointing to the fraudulent credit applications, the background check she ordered without authorization, and the detailed stalking notes found in her home. The HOA's insurance eventually offered a settlement for $20,000 to cover my legal fees and damages. David advised me to take it, since going to trial would be expensive and time-consuming, and the insurance company was the only entity with deep enough pockets to actually pay. Susan personally was likely to declare bankruptcy once the criminal trial was over. I accepted the settlement. Susan's criminal trial was scheduled for September, about 5 months after her arrest. The county attorney offered her a plea deal. Plead guilty to 1 count of identity theft and 1 count of fraud. Serve 18 months in prison with 3 years probation, and pay restitution for the costs I had incurred. Her attorney advised her to take it, since the evidence against her was overwhelming. She refused. Susan insisted on going to trial, apparently convinced she could convince a jury that she had been doing her job as HOA president, and that someone else must have used the information she collected. Her attorney looked miserable every time I saw him in court, probably because he knew it was a losing case. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented the IP records showing the fraudulent credit applications had been submitted from Susan's home computer. They showed the security footage of Susan renting the P.O. box with a fake ID. They brought in Marcus to testify about the timeline of the identity theft attempts and how they correlated with Susan's access to my receipts and financial information. Most damning was when they introduced the notebook found in Susan's home. The prosecutor read entries out loud in court. Susan had documented everywhere I went, what time I left my house, what clients I visited, and even personal details like what I bought at the grocery store. She had written things like verify his supplier accounts and check business registration in other counties that showed clear intent to use the information for fraudulent purposes beyond just HOA enforcement. I testified on the second day. Susan's attorney tried to make me seem paranoid or like I was exaggerating the harassment, but David had prepared me well. I stayed calm, stuck to the facts, and let the documentation speak for itself. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Susan guilty on all charges: identity theft, fraud, stalking, and theft of financial information. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Susan looked like she had aged 10 years, her hair now completely gray and her face drawn. She made a statement before sentencing where she apologized and claimed she had been going through a difficult time in her personal life and had made mistakes. She asked for leniency. The judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Patterson, you held a position of trust in your community as HOA president," the judge said. "You abused that trust systematically and deliberately to target Mr. Quincy for reasons that still are not entirely clear. You did not just make mistakes. You committed calculated crimes over a period of months. You stole his personal information, used it to attempt fraud multiple times, and stalked him to the point where he felt unsafe in his own neighborhood. This court takes these crimes seriously." Susan was sentenced to 4 years in prison with 5 years of probation after release. She was also ordered to pay full restitution, which totaled over $30,000, including my legal fees, credit monitoring costs, and the settlement the HOA insurance had paid. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into the Phoenix sunshine feeling like a weight had been lifted. Marcus met me on the steps. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Relieved," I said. "I honestly did not think it would go this far. When this started, I thought it was just an annoying HOA president being controlling. I never imagined it was actual identity theft." "That is because normal people do not think that way," Marcus said. "Normal people do not use their position of authority to steal from their neighbors." Susan Patterson was not normal. We went to lunch at a place in downtown Phoenix, and Marcus filled me in on the final accounting of everything. The fraudulent credit applications had been fully removed from my records. My credit scores had actually gone up because of all the monitoring and corrections we had made. My business was doing fine, better than fine actually, because some of the publicity from the trial had resulted in new clients who appreciated that I had stood up to abuse. "You know what the weirdest part is?" I said, picking at my sandwich. "I still live in Meadowbrook Hills. I see her house every time I drive through the neighborhood. I keep expecting her to jump out from behind a bush or something." "She is in prison," Marcus pointed out. "She cannot hurt you anymore." "I know," I said, "but it still feels weird." Over the next few months, life slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board under Tom's leadership was professional and reasonable. They actually asked for input from residents before making changes. Imagine that. The neighborhood felt more relaxed without Susan's constant surveillance and nitpicking. I kept running my business, installing outdoor kitchens and patio spaces all over the Phoenix metro area. Southwest Propane Supply even gave me a discount on future purchases after everything that happened, which was nice of them. I also started dating someone, a woman named Zara Reynolds who worked as a project manager for a local construction company. We met at a home and garden expo in Tempe, and she asked me out after hearing about my business. I told her about the whole Susan situation on our second date, expecting her to think I was crazy or paranoid. Instead, Zara said, "That is absolutely terrifying. I am so glad you got her arrested. Too many people just let HOAs walk all over them." "I did not have much choice," I admitted. "She was literally stealing my identity." "Still," Zara said, "a lot of people would have just paid the fines and tried to move or something. You fought back." About a year after Susan's sentencing, I got a call from Detective Morrison. It was unexpected since I had not heard from him in months. "Mr. Quincy, I wanted to give you an update," he said. "Susan Patterson was released early from prison. She served about 2 years of her sentence and got out on good behavior." My stomach clenched. "Is she coming back to Scottsdale?" "No," Detective Morrison said quickly. "Part of her probation conditions is that she cannot live in Maricopa County. She moved to Flagstaff to live with a relative. But I wanted you to know in case you were concerned. She also cannot contact you in any way, and if she violates probation, she goes right back to prison to serve the rest of her sentence." "Okay," I said, feeling slightly better. "Thanks for letting me know. Also, I do not know if you heard, but she declared bankruptcy," Detective Morrison added. "So the restitution she owes you, you probably will not see much of that." "I figured," I said. I had already written off that money in my head. The settlement from the HOA insurance had covered most of my costs anyway. After hanging up, I told Zara about the call. We were at my house, sitting on the new patio I had built in my backyard, complete with a custom outdoor kitchen that I had designed for myself. It had become something of a showpiece that I brought potential clients to see. "How do you feel about her being out?" Zara asked. "Honestly, I do not really feel anything," I said, surprising myself. "It happened, it was terrible, but it is over. She cannot hurt me anymore, and I have moved on." "That is healthy," Zara said, raising her beer in a mock toast. "Plus, the new HOA board is actually competent," I added. "Tom runs things like an actual business. No drama, no harassment, just maintaining the neighborhood like they are supposed to." "Revolutionary concept," Zara said with a laugh. Life continued. My business grew. Zara and I got more serious, and she eventually moved into my house in Meadowbrook Hills. Some of the neighbors who had believed Susan's lies about me went out of their way to be friendly, probably feeling guilty. I did not hold it against them. Susan had been convincing and had been in a position of authority. People tend to trust that. The only lingering reminder of the whole ordeal was the hypervigilance about my personal information. I shredded everything now, even junk mail. I checked my credit report religiously. I had multiple fraud alerts on all my accounts. Marcus said it was smart, but I knew it was also because some part of me was still waiting for another Susan to appear. But she never did. 2 years after Susan's arrest, Tom knocked on my door on a Saturday afternoon. He had a clipboard and a formal-looking document. "Seth, got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what is up?" I said, inviting him in. "The HOA board has been discussing how to prevent what happened with Susan from ever happening again," Tom said. "We have put together a proposed amendment to our covenants that would create more oversight and accountability for board members. We would need a majority vote from homeowners to pass it." He handed me the document. I skimmed through it. The amendment required background checks for board members, mandatory training on HOA laws and ethics, limits on enforcement actions without full board approval, and a formal appeals process for homeowners. "This is good," I said. "Really good, actually." "We are calling it the Quincy Amendment," Tom said with a slight smile, "because what happened to you should never happen to anyone in any HOA. "You do not have to name it after me," I said, feeling embarrassed. "We want to," Tom said. "It is a reminder of why this matters. We have been going around getting signatures to bring it to a vote. Would you sign?" I signed it, and so did enough other homeowners that it came up for a vote at the next HOA meeting. It passed unanimously. The Quincy Amendment became official on January 1st. 3 years after Susan had first been caught digging through my recycling bin. I did not attend the meeting where they formalized it because Zara and I were in California visiting her family, but Tom sent me a photo of the signed document afterward. "You are famous," Zara teased when I showed her the photo. "Infamous is more like it," I said. "But if it keeps another HOA president from going crazy and stealing someone's identity, then I guess something good came out of this mess." Looking back on everything, the whole experience taught me a few things. First, never underestimate how far someone will go when they are convinced they have authority over you. Susan had taken her role as HOA president to an extreme that bordered on delusional, believing that her position gave her the right to invade my privacy and steal my information. Second, document everything. If I had not kept records, taken photos of Susan following me, saved all her letters, and immediately reported the identity theft to both police and my accountant, things could have turned out very differently. Evidence matters. Third, do not be afraid to stand up for yourself even when the other person has more power or authority. Susan was HOA president, and plenty of neighbors believed her at first. It would have been easier to just pay her fines and avoid conflict. But sometimes easy is not right, and standing up to bullies, even legal ones, is worth it. And fourth, Most people are actually decent when given the chance. The new HOA board was nothing like Susan. They were reasonable, professional, and actually cared about maintaining the neighborhood rather than controlling people. Tom and Patricia both went out of their way to make sure I felt comfortable staying in Meadowbrook Hills. After everything that happened, my business continued to thrive. I ended up hiring 2 employees to help with the increased workload, including a young guy named Chris, who was amazing at custom tile work. We expanded services to include full outdoor living spaces, not just kitchens, and I started getting contracts for high-end residential projects in Paradise Valley and Fountain Hills. Zara and I got engaged on the anniversary of Susan's arrest, which was either morbid or poetic depending on how you looked at it. We decided on poetic. She said yes on the same patio where we had discussed Susan's release from prison, which felt like reclaiming the space and the narrative. We got married the following spring in a small ceremony in our backyard, with the outdoor kitchen as the catering setup. Tom officiated because he had gotten ordained online specifically for HOA dispute mediation, which was possibly the most practical use of an online ordination I had ever heard of. Marcus was my best man, and he spent the entire toast making accounting jokes that only he and 3 other people understood. Life was good. Better than good, actually. I still lived in the same house in Meadowbrook Hills, still ran my business from my home office, and still got propane deliveries for my clients' outdoor kitchens. But now, when deliveries came, nobody was watching. Nobody was digging through my recycling. Nobody was taking pictures and following me around. The neighborhood had moved on from the Susan Patterson era. New families had moved in who had never met her and only knew the story as neighborhood legend. The house Susan used to live in had been sold during her bankruptcy, and a nice couple with twin toddlers lived there now. They had no idea about their home's history, and I saw no reason to tell them. Sometimes I wondered what Susan was doing in Flagstaff, whether she had learned anything from the experience, whether she regretted her actions. But mostly, I did not think about her at all. She had taken up enough of my time and energy. She did not deserve more. The Quincy Amendment actually started getting attention from other HOAs in Arizona. Tom was invited to speak at a few conferences about HOA reform and accountability. He always insisted I come with him, saying it was more impactful to hear from someone who had actually been victimized by HOA abuse of power. I went to a few of these conferences, telling my story to rooms full of HOA board members, homeowners, and property managers. Some people were skeptical, like they thought I was exaggerating. But others had their own horror stories about HOA overreach, and they appreciated hearing that there were consequences for board members who abused their authority. One woman in Tucson told me her HOA president had been fining her for made-up violations because her daughter was dating the president's son and had broken up with him. The president was trying to force them to move. After hearing my story, she filed a police report and contacted an attorney. Last I heard, her HOA president had been removed and was facing harassment charges. Another guy in Mesa said his HOA board had been embezzling money from the community fund for years. Hearing about the investigation into Susan gave him the courage to demand an audit, which revealed over $50,000 in missing funds. The whole board ended up arrested. It turned out Susan was not unique. There were HOA tyrants all over Arizona, all over the country really, who used their positions to bully and control, and sometimes outright steal from the people they were supposed to serve. My story became a rallying point for people who wanted to fight back. I never set out to be some kind of HOA reform advocate. I just wanted to install outdoor kitchens and live quietly in my house. But sometimes, life pushes you into roles you did not expect, and you can either embrace it or run from it. I chose to embrace it. So yeah, that is the story of how my HOA president stole my propane receipts and used them to commit identity theft, and how my accountant's vigilance and the Scottsdale Police Department brought her to justice. It is weird, it is stranger than fiction, and it is all true. These days, when people ask me about HOAs, I tell them they are not inherently evil. They are just organizations made up of people. And like any organization, they are only as good or bad as the people running them. The key is accountability, transparency, and the willingness of homeowners to speak up when something is wrong. Because if I had stayed quiet, if I had just paid Susan's fines and tried to avoid conflict, she would have kept escalating. The identity theft would have continued. She might have targeted other people in the neighborhood. Who knows how far it would have gone, but I did not stay quiet. I documented everything, I reported it to police, I hired an attorney, and I fought back through legal channels. And in the end, justice was served. Susan Patterson spent 2 years in prison and will be on probation for several more. She lost her position, her reputation, her house, and her freedom. The Quincy Amendment helps ensure that future HOA board members in Meadowbrook Hills will be held to higher standards with real oversight. And me. I am still here, still working, still living in the same house where this all started. My business is successful, I am married to an amazing woman, and my relationship with my neighbors and HOA is actually pretty good now. It took a crazy, terrifying journey to get here, but I would not change it. Well, I would prefer not to have been the victim of identity theft, but you know what I mean. The experience taught me important lessons about standing up for yourself, the importance of documentation, and the value of good people like Marcus and David and Detective Morrison who helped me through it. So if you are reading this and you are dealing with HOA harassment or abuse of authority, do not suffer in silence. Document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to escalate to law enforcement or attorneys if necessary. HOA board members are not above the law, no matter how much authority they think they have. And for goodness sake, shred your receipts before putting them in the recycling.